The snow was falling in slow, silent layers across the city of Madrid, covering every rooftop, sidewalk, and street lamp in a delicate white hush. It should have been beautiful, picturesque even. But to James Carter, sitting alone on a wooden bench in Retiro Park, it felt like the world was burying him with every flake. He wasn't dressed for the weather. A sleek black overcoat, designer shoes, fine for boardrooms, but not for grieving in the cold. His gloved hands were clenched in his lap, but his shoulders trembled, not from the chill, but from something deeper. His eyes were red, not from the wind, but from the ache that had hollowed out his chest hours ago. His mother was gone. No illness, no warning, just a phone call from a nurse. A heart attack. Peaceful, they'd said. Quick. She had been the last person left who truly knew him, who called him Jimmy, who kept his birthday cards, who once mailed him his childhood stuffed bear when he was 29 and hadn't been home in 5 years. He had missed her final moments. Why? Because he was in a glass tower across the city, finalizing the European launch of Carter AI's newest algorithmic platform, a historic step forward in global intelligence, the press release had said. James had sat through that entire meeting pretending he wasn't about to lose the only person in the world who called him just to say, "I love you." He hadn't made it in time. He hadn't even tried. The snow gathered on his shoulders, unnoticed. He didn't cry often. He hadn't cried in years, honestly. But now, it was different. The tears came slow at first, then faster, like everything he'd kept sealed behind productivity reports and market shares was cracking wide open in the December air. He covered his face, ashamed of the sounds escaping his chest, the sobs that broke out like hiccups. A man like him, James Carter, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech empire, shouldn't cry on a park bench. Not here, not now. But he did. And then, "Don't cry. You can borrow my mom." The voice was high, clear, and completely matter-of-fact. James blinked through the blur and looked up. A little boy, no older than 5, stood a few feet in front of him, bundled up in a navy blue coat, mittens that didn't match, and a hat that flopped sideways over one ear. His cheeks were pink from the cold, but his eyes, wide, hazel, and curious, were steady. He stared at James not with fear or pity, but simple concern. "I don't mind sharing her," the boy added. "Just for a little bit." James was too stunned to speak. "Are you okay?" the boy asked, now stepping closer. James tried, wiping his face with his sleeve. "No, not really." The boy nodded like that made perfect sense. "Mom says it's okay to be sad on Christmas. She cries sometimes too, mostly when she looks at old pictures." James let out a breath. It wasn't a laugh, but it was the first sound that wasn't soaked in sorrow. "Oliver!" a woman's voice called from down the path. A moment later, a figure appeared between the trees, hurrying over the snow-covered walkway. She was in her mid-30s with a wool scarf around her neck and snowflakes caught in her long brown hair. She looked flustered, but not angry. "Sweetheart, you can't just wander off." She stopped when she saw James. Her expression shifted in an instant, from concern to recognition to something softer. She glanced at the man on the bench, then at her son, and understood more than James expected her to. "I'm so sorry," she said gently, stepping forward. "Oliver has a habit of, talking to strangers like they're old friends." James shook his head. "It's all right. He was kind." Oliver beamed at that. The woman offered a faint, apologetic smile. "We were just heading home. It's Christmas Eve and the snow is getting heavier." James nodded, expecting her to leave. Maybe that would have been best. But then she hesitated. Her eyes lingered on his tear-streaked face, and something changed. "I know this might sound strange," she said, voice lower now, more cautious. "But would you like to join us for dinner?" He blinked. "Dinner?" "It's nothing fancy," she added quickly. "Just soup, a few cookies, and probably too much hot chocolate. But you look like you could use somewhere warm to be." James opened his mouth, but no words came. Oliver leaned forward, hopeful. "We have a fireplace, and she makes the best marshmallow towers." James almost smiled. He should have said no. He didn't even know these people. He had never accepted help from strangers, especially not on a day like this. But there was something in the way the woman looked at him, something without judgment, without expectation. Just openness, human kindness, unfiltered. "I'm Lauren," she said. "And this is Oliver." He looked at them both. "I'm James." Lauren offered her hand. It was warm even through the glove. She didn't flinch when he shook it. "I'm really sorry for whatever you're going through," she said softly. He swallowed hard, then nodded, and for the first time in hours, the weight in his chest shifted. Not gone, but no longer crushing him entirely. "I'd like that dinner," he said. Oliver cheered, already bouncing ahead. Lauren smiled, and they turned to walk together through the snow. Behind them, the bench sat empty, collecting more snow. But the air around it no longer felt quite so cold. The apartment was small, maybe 800 square feet, but it felt like it contained a world. As soon as James stepped inside, he was hit by a flood of warmth, both literal and emotional. The air smelled like cinnamon, roasted vegetables, and something sweet. Cookies, maybe. There was a small Christmas tree near the window, unevenly decorated with paper stars and a string of colored lights that blinked out of sync. A pair of snow boots lay abandoned by the door. A coat rack leaned slightly to one side, the living room carpet was worn in the center, and a stack of children's books teetered near the couch. In any other context, James might have called it clutter. But here, in this place, it felt like life. Oliver ran ahead, unzipping his coat and tossing it onto a chair. "Mom, did you put extra marshmallows in the hot chocolate?" he asked, peeking over the kitchen counter. "Of course I did," Lauren replied, pulling a tray from the oven. "And don't touch until dinner, mister." James stood in the doorway, a little unsure of what to do with himself. He didn't remember the last time he'd been inside a home that wasn't curated by an interior designer or featured in Architectural Digest. "Here," Lauren said, gently taking his coat. "Make yourself comfortable." He gave a small, awkward nod and stepped into the living room. The couch was soft and overused, with a quilt draped across the back and a basket of toys tucked beneath the coffee table. On the wall were framed photos, Lauren and Oliver at the beach, Oliver with chocolate all over his face, and one picture in particular that caught James's eye. A man stood beside Lauren, smiling in the kind of quiet way that suggests peace. His arm was around her. Oliver, barely 2 in the photo, sat on his shoulders. Lauren followed his gaze. "That's Charlie," she said softly. "My husband. He passed away when Oliver was 3. James turned to her. I'm sorry." "Thank you," she replied, not with sadness but with a kind of quiet acceptance. "It was hard. Still is. But Oliver keeps me going." At that, Oliver poked his head around the kitchen door. "Are you talking about Daddy?" "Yes, baby," Lauren said, "just telling James how much we miss him." Oliver walked over, holding a piece of paper in his small hands. "I made a new one," he said, handing it to James. James unfolded the paper carefully. It was a crayon drawing, done in the bold, uncoordinated lines of a young child. 4 figures stood beneath a big yellow sun. One was clearly Oliver, short, spiky brown hair. Next to him was Lauren, in a dress, smiling. Then there was James, tall, in a suit, with messy dark hair. And hovering slightly above them all, a figure with wings. "That's you," Oliver said, pointing. "That's Mommy. That's me. And that," he tapped the angel, "is Daddy. He watches us now, but you can still be here." James felt his throat tighten. He swallowed hard and looked at the drawing again, then at Oliver, who was already skipping back toward the table. Lauren gave him a look that was both an apology and a thank you. "He draws what he wishes for." James couldn't speak. He folded the paper with care, like it was a letter from a time machine, and placed it inside his coat pocket. Dinner was simple but warm. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and homemade rolls that were slightly overcooked but smelled like heaven. James sat at the table across from Oliver beside Lauren and tried to remember the last time he had eaten a meal that wasn't catered or delivered. He tried not to be too aware of his posture, of how he was holding his fork, of how utterly foreign this all felt. But something about the setting made it easier to breathe. "So," Lauren asked, sipping her water, "what does someone like you do on Christmas Eve normally?" James gave a small shrug. "Emails, scheduling. Sometimes I catch a red-eye back to New York if there's a meeting the next morning." "Sounds festive," she said, smiling into her cup. "I don't really do holidays anymore." Oliver made a face. "Not even Halloween?" James chuckled. "I missed that one too." "Man," Oliver muttered, shaking his head in dramatic disapproval. "You need a calendar." Lauren laughed, and the sound warmed the room more than the fireplace behind them. James glanced around again, his eyes settling on the little things: mismatched plates, the paper snowflakes hanging from the ceiling, the way Lauren's hand instinctively reached out to brush crumbs from Oliver's cheek. He wasn't used to this kind of atmosphere. It didn't come with contracts, KPIs, or exit strategies. It was just real. After dinner, they moved to the couch where Lauren handed out mugs of hot chocolate. Oliver's had whipped cream and marshmallows stacked like a tower, just as he'd promised. James held his cup between his palms, grateful for the heat. "So," Lauren said after a quiet moment, "what about you? Any family nearby?" He looked down at his drink. "No, just my mother. She passed away today." Lauren's face shifted instantly. "James." "She lived in Boston," he continued. "I hadn't seen her in months. I was supposed to fly back next week." Oliver stopped sipping. "That's why you were sad in the park?" James nodded. "I'm really sorry," Lauren said, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "I should have been there," he said quietly. "I wasn't, and now I can't fix it." Lauren didn't say anything. She didn't offer cliches or silver linings. She just let the silence hold the weight of his grief. Eventually, James looked over at her. "Thank you. For dinner. For everything." "You're welcome," she said, her voice soft. "Anytime." He glanced at the clock. It was past 9. Snow was still falling softly outside the window. "I should probably head out." Lauren nodded, rising to get his coat. As he stood, Oliver appeared at his side. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" James looked at him, surprised. "We're going sledding," Oliver said, eyes wide with hope. "And Mom makes pancakes." James hesitated. The word yes was right there, perched on the edge of his tongue. But old instincts pulled at him. Schedules, appearances, obligations. "I'll try," he said finally. Oliver gave him a wide grin and hugged his leg. James froze for a moment, then placed a hand on the boy's back, steady and slow. Lauren returned with his coat. "You're welcome any time, James." He looked at her, at the room, at the tiny paper snowflakes twirling gently above the heater vent. "Thank you," he said again. And when he stepped outside into the snow, the cold didn't feel quite so sharp. The weeks after Christmas unfolded like pages in a book James hadn't realized he was reading. The first visit after that snowy night had been accidental, or so he told himself. He was in the neighborhood. He happened to remember Oliver's mention of pancakes. But the truth was simpler. He wanted to be there. And so, one Sunday morning turned into another, then into a Thursday dinner, a Saturday walk, a school pickup. James Carter, CEO of Carter AI, started showing up, without press releases or calendars, just with puzzles under his arm, or books Lauren said Oliver would like. Sometimes he brought dinner. Sometimes he brought himself. In Lauren's apartment, time moved differently. The seconds didn't tick toward deadlines or quarterly earnings. They floated, soft and unrushed. Oliver's chatter filled the space between silences, and Lauren's presence made even the quiet feel full. One chilly February evening, James arrived carrying a shoebox under one arm. "I found this in my storage unit," he said, handing it to Oliver. Inside were vintage puzzles, some wooden, some faded, all from James's childhood. One had his name etched into the corner in a child's handwriting, Jimmy. "Wait," Oliver said, stunned. "You were a kid too?" Lauren laughed, and James gave her a mock glare. "Yes, a long time ago. Back when dinosaurs delivered the mail. They spent hours on the floor, piecing together old memories with new hands." James watched Oliver's face light up every time a piece fit, and something small inside him, something brittle, began to mend. Later that week, after Oliver had gone to bed, James and Lauren sat on the couch nursing mugs of tea. A soft instrumental played from a small speaker, and the window pane fogged gently from the warmth inside. "He's different when you're around," Lauren said. "Is that a good thing?" James asked, only half joking. "He's happier," she replied. "More settled, like he knows he's safe." James looked down at his tea. "I'm not used to this." "Used to what?" "Being needed, and not because I can sign a contract or fund a project." Lauren smiled, and for a long moment, the silence between them held something sacred. Back at the office, the contrast was jarring. Emails stacked up like digital snowdrifts. Meetings loomed, and his business partner, Adrian Shaw, was growing impatient. "We're days away from the biggest merger in this company's history," Adrian said one Monday morning, his voice tight through the speakerphone. "Where the hell have you been?" James, seated in his office, stared out the window. "Madrid," he said. "I know where you are, James. What I don't know is why you're missing strategy calls or ignoring our legal team." James turned in his chair. "I needed some space." "From what? A multi-billion-dollar deal?" James hesitated. "I'm not sure this merger is what we need." There was silence on the line. Then, "What the hell is going on with you?" James didn't answer. He ended the call and sat back, rubbing his hands over his face. What was going on with him? A week later, Oliver's school hosted a winter performance, songs and skits by the first and second graders. James had promised to be there. He cleared his schedule. He even dressed down, wearing a sweater Lauren had said made him look less Wall Street, more human. But 20 minutes before the show, his phone buzzed. Boardroom, urgent, Zoom link attached. He stared at the screen. He could still make it if he left now. He could, but he didn't. Instead, he took his seat in the second row of the tiny auditorium, next to Lauren. The chairs were uncomfortable, the heating unreliable, and the acoustics awful. But when Oliver stepped on stage in a paper snowflake crown and sang his heart out to a half-forgotten holiday tune, James smiled bigger than he had in years. Afterward, Oliver ran up to him, arms wide. "You came." "Of course I did," James said, kneeling to hug him. "You were amazing." Lauren stood nearby, watching the exchange with a quiet, unreadable look. Later that night, while Oliver slept, James lingered in the living room. Lauren handed him a blanket and sat beside him on the couch. "You missed something important today, didn't you?" she asked gently. He nodded. "It'll cause problems." "Big ones?" "Probably." She took a breath. Then, "Thank you for choosing this instead." He looked at her. "I'm not sure I did it for the right reasons. There's no right reason to show up for someone. You just do." A long pause settled between them, filled only by the ticking of the kitchen clock. Then Lauren turned to him, her voice quieter. "Just, if you ever decide to walk away from this, from us..." James straightened slightly. "I'm not saying you have to stay," she added quickly. "But please don't disappear. Not without saying goodbye." He nodded slowly, his chest heavy. "I wouldn't." But even as he said it, the fear was still there. A part of him couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong in this world, that one day it would collapse under the weight of his past. Then, the next morning, a letter arrived at his Madrid apartment. It was handwritten, on blue stationery, in careful script he hadn't seen in years. His mother's handwriting. He sat at his kitchen table, hands trembling, as he opened it. "Dear Jimmy, I'm writing this, knowing you probably won't read it until I'm gone. That's all right. There are some things I needed to say anyway. You've always been brilliant. From the moment you dismantled the toaster, just to see how it worked, I knew your brain wasn't like everyone else's. But somewhere along the way, I think the world convinced you that being great meant being alone. That love was a luxury for people with time to waste. You never wasted time. But Jimmy, sometimes the best moments are the waste. I hope you find someone who reminds you how to be soft. I hope there's laughter in your home again. I hope more than anything that you feel chosen, not for what you've built, but for who you are. And if a little boy ever draws you with wings, don't argue. Just thank him. With all my love, Mom. James sat there for a long time after reading it. The ink had smudged in one corner, maybe from her own tears, maybe from his. He folded the letter, placed it beside Oliver's drawing on the counter, and stared at them both. Somewhere between loss and rediscovery, between ambition and stillness, something had shifted. He was no longer just borrowing time. He was building something. The snow was falling again, soft, silent, slow. The same park, the same night. The same old wooden bench worn smooth by seasons of stories and solitude. But this time, it was different. This time, James wasn't alone. Oliver skipped ahead in the snow, bundled in a red coat 2 sizes larger than last year's. His cheeks were pink, and a wool hat bounced on his head with every step. He held a stick like a sword, clearing imaginary paths in the icy trail. Behind him, James and Lauren walked side by side, their gloved hands just barely touching now and then. Not intentionally, not awkwardly, but like they belonged in the same rhythm. It had been exactly 1 year since that night. 1 year since grief swallowed James on that bench. 1 year since a small boy offered to lend him a mother. 1 year since something cracked open in him and the light got in. Life hadn't turned into a fairy tale. James still worked. Just less. Lauren still taught 2nd grade. Oliver still had temper tantrums over bedtime. But the hollow parts in all of them had slowly filled in, day by day, memory by memory, small kindness by small kindness. Almost there, Oliver shouted over his shoulder. The bench came into view. It looked just the same, half buried in snow, leaning slightly to the left. But to James, it was unrecognizable. Once a place of endings, it had become something else entirely. They reached it, brushed the snow off the seat, and sat. Oliver climbed onto the middle, sandwiching himself between them. He pulled something from his coat pocket, a small candy cane, half broken, wrapped in tissue paper. "For you," he said to James solemnly. James smiled. "What's the occasion?" "You don't need an occasion for candy," Oliver replied, dead serious. Lauren chuckled. The park was quiet except for the crunch of snow beneath distant footsteps and the rustle of bare branches swaying in the wind. Lights from nearby windows shimmered through the trees, warm and golden. For a while, no one said anything. Then, without turning, Oliver asked softly, "Are you still sad about your mom?" James didn't answer right away. He looked ahead, watching a couple walk hand in hand across the path, their laughter faint but real. "Yeah," he said at last. "I think I always will be." He felt Lauren glance at him, but he kept his eyes on the snow. "But it's not the same kind of sad. It's quieter now, more grateful than heavy." Oliver nodded like he understood, then swung his legs back and forth. "I'm glad I lent you my mom," he said simply. James turned, his throat tightening. Oliver looked up at him, earnest as ever. "Now we both have one again." James didn't speak. Couldn't. Instead, he reached over, pulling Oliver into his arms. The boy snuggled into his coat without hesitation. Lauren leaned her head against James's shoulder, and he wrapped his other arm around her. No declarations, no promises, just warmth, presence, love, and the quiet understanding that this was what healing looked like. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of something strong enough to hold it. They sat there until the cold began to nibble at their toes, until Oliver fell half asleep in James's lap, until the world softened into blue shadows and golden lights. Then they stood. James took one last look at the bench. A year ago, it had been the place where everything fell apart. Tonight, it was the place where it all came together. They walked home slowly, Oliver dozing in James's arms, Lauren beside them, and behind them the snow continued to fall, covering footprints, yes, but never erasing them.